Hello, everyone. This is episode number 12 of the World War II Daily Podcast with your hosts, Samuel De Corti and me, Pietro. Today, we continue our exploration of the remarkable story of Black women during World War II, focusing especially on the 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion, as depicted in the new historical Netflix movie 6888. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend you to check it out. By the way, this interview is the second we do about Black women in World War II and the 6888. The first one we did with Molly Sampson, who was a historical consultant for the movie. So be sure you go and check that out too. Okay? So to help us dive deeper into this very interesting topic, we're honored to have a very special guest with us today. Mrs. Edna Cummings, I'm sorry. Uh, First, Edna, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us and share your expertise with both of us and our audience. And we're truly excited to have you here today. Before we get started, don't forget that this show is available on YouTube, Spotify, Deezer, Amazon, and now we are also on Apple Podcasts. After a long battle, I managed to post it on Apple, but so it's there. Be sure to like, subscribe, and engage with us. It really helps the project. Daily World War II content and updates about the show. Follow us on Instagram at World War II underscore daily and at Samuel.decorti. Links will be available on the description of the episode. Now, let me introduce our guest. Her career is truly one of the most remarkable we've ever had the privilege of presenting here. Here we go. A native Fayetteville, North Carolina, Colonel Cummings operates a Washington, D.C. area consultancy specializing in management and proposal services for federal and commercial clients. She was the first African American woman to earn her commission as an Army officer through the Army Reserve Officer Training Corps program at the Appalachian State University. Afterwards, she embarked on a distinguished 25-year military career in a variety of progressive assignments, culminating with the senior level positions at Georgetown University, the Pentagon, and NORAD, USNORTHCOM in Colorado Springs. Since January 2018, retired Army Colonel Edna Cummings has worked to bring recognition to the all-black World War II Women's Army Corps unit, the 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion, also known as the 6888. As a citizen advocate, she raised funds for the 6888 monument and co-produced an award-winning documentary about the unit. She successfully championed the effort with, with Congress to enact passage of the 6888 Congressional Gold Medal Act. Colonel Cummings holds a Master's of Strategic Studies in the Army War College and a Master's of Science degree in Foundations of Education in Troy State University. She's also a graduate of the Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth. Quartermaster's Officers Basic and Advanced Courses in Fort Lee and the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute, on Patrick Air Force Base. As an Army officer, she received the Defense Superior Service Medal, Meritorious Service Medal, 3 awards, Army Commendation Awards, 4 awards, Joint Service Commendation Award, Armed Superior Unit, Reserve Forces Medal, Overseas Service Ribbon, National Defensive Service Medal, and the Armed Staff Identification Badge, among other the many other military and civic recognitions. In March 2020, Colonel Cummings was inducted into the Army into the Army Women's Foundation Hall of Fame and the Military Officers Association of America and the Military Officers Association of America selected her as one of its National Changemakers. In July 2022, she received the NAACP's Chess Brown Leadership Award. And lastly, see, that's a big curriculum. She's amazing. And lastly, she's the author of the book entitled A Soldier's Life: A Black Woman's Rise from Army Brat to 688 Champion. The Black Soldier in War and Society: New Narratives and Critical Perspectives. The book's coming out on May of this year, 2025. Before we do anything else, I would like to say that the link for the book will be on the description of this episode, and we're going to be sharing as much as we can about it on our Instagram pages. So be sure you follow us there to stay um, tuned. All right, so Mrs. Cummings, welcome to the World War II Daily Podcast with me, Pietro Deserti, and my good friend Samuel De Corti. First of all, do you want to say anything about this intro? Because that was a lot, and I don't know if it's accurate. So if you want to correct or add anything, please.
Oh, it's close enough, and thank you so very much. That was a lot. I'm surprised that you were able to get it all out. But the great things have happened since then within my career. I also worked with this fantastic group. I'm vice president of Windsor Group LLC out of Bethesda, Maryland, another professional services company. I'm now a distinguished alum of Appalachian State, distinguished alum for the Army War College, and I just appreciate the support that I'm getting from everyone. So thank you so very much.
Awesome. So for us to start with the questions, I always ask our guests one first question, which is a classic of our show. So where does your interest in World War II and all of that comes from?
Yeah. My interest in World War II comes from my family. I was born on a military installation. My father served in Italy post World War II in the occupation force. He corrects me. He says that he served occupation force. But I had some uncles who served in the Navy and the Army during World War II. So that's one area. And then later on, I learned that my mother had a friend who was in the 6888. So that passion and interest is personal because my family is so connected to that era.
Awesome. Didn't know that. That's cool. All right.
Mhm.
Okay. So let's jump into the first question. Where does your it's already here. I didn't see you put that here, Samuel. Sorry. So
Mhm.
can you start by giving us an overview of what the 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion was and what their mission was during World War II?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the 6888 was only a portion of the more than 7,000 Black women who served on active duty during World War II, and I'm including the nurses. So the 6888 was formed from three parts of the Army's Corps, the Women's Army Corps. They were formed from the Army Service Forces, the Army Air Corps, and the Women's Army Corps. And it was a need that our nation had to restore morale in the European theater of operations. And also was a need to include Black women in the overseas war effort. So, because of the efforts of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune and First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who advocated for Black women to have meaningful roles in the war in the US and abroad. And the mission was identified. Troop morale was plummeting because the troops hadn't received their mail on the front line. But I don't know, people may or may not be aware of, the Army manages mail for everyone overseas. They manage mail, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, at the time Coast Guard, because it was an operational force. So the Army took care of the mail for all military and civilian personnel, total about 7 million who passed through the European theater of operations. But it was being backlogged because of post D-Day post D-Day activities, pre-D-Day preparations. So it had been backlogged about 2 or 3 years.
Interesting. So the
Mhm.
army managed everything.
Yeah, the mail.
The
Yeah, the
mail, yeah,
Army
concerning
now,
the mail.
right. And now the Army is
I
called
didn't
the
know.
executive agent. Even now, the Army is still in charge of the mail for our armed forces when they deploy overseas. I don't think a lot of people know that. So
I
that's
didn't know.
why the 6888, a member of the Women's Army Corps, first of all, the Army had the mission, and someone needed to get it done.
That's interesting. Did you
Hmm.
know that, Samuel? I didn't.
I didn't. Oh.
Yeah.
That's cool. All right. So, why is the 6888 often considered one of the most unique military units of the war?
Yeah. For a lot of reasons, the 6888 is considered a unique unit for the obvious. They were women, they were black women, and from the black diaspora. All of the women were women of color and who identified as black by chance or by choice. And then on top of that, they were led by a black commander. Most black units, all black units during World War II usually had a white commander. So that's something that's unique about the 6888. And then the only black women's Army Corps unit sent overseas. So those variables, and they were women primarily, the Women's Army Corps. They were black women, and then these black women sent overseas, specially formed for a mission that no one else could solve. So that is the unique aspect of the 6888. They solve the military's male and morale problem during World War II.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Do you wanna go ahead, Samuel?
So, what were some of the challenges that the women of the 6888 faced when they arrived in Europe?
Mhm.
So, they arrived in Europe first, they went to England, and then later they arrived in France. What were some of the challenges that they faced?
Well, the biggest challenge the 6888 faced were logistics because the 6888, first of all, the 6888 did not receive the name the 6888 until March. They were a provisional unit with, they were called Romeo Tango RT 510C, a provisional unit. So, first of all, the 6888 was not the 6888 formally until March, early March. And the challenge was putting order into the chaos. There was an existing postal network in Birmingham, England, and this area surrounding Birmingham, England. And war started in 1939, so England had been involved in the war before the U.S. got involved. So the 6888 arrived to a war-torn country, and then to the King Edward School that is still there in Birmingham, England. And I've learned to pronounce Birmingham. It's not Birmingham, it's Birmingham. Birmingham, England. And they had to make this facility, this empty, damaged school, livable. And then that was the first challenge, logistics. The second challenge was to set up workstations and to again making that environment workable. They worked some in King Edward School, and then they also had to work in buildings, provisional buildings around the school. I've been to King Edward School a couple of times, and so the school is still there, but some of the work sites are not there. That was the first issue. And then the second issue was just figuring out how to sort through 2 to 3 years backlog of mail. So it was just a huge logistical problem that since 1941, since 1941, that the mail had been coming in that general area, Sutton Coldfield, close to Birmingham, England, and it was just stored in warehouses, airplane hangars, and just figuring out how to reduce that backlog. So the 6888 biggest problem was one of logistics.
It's it's crazy how I said that to Molly before, but how we like we talk about World War II on internet on Instagram, and we don't see people talking about mail, and how important mail still is. It's different nowadays, of course, but it how important it was, and nobody talks about it. It's like interesting to see, and it's good that with the movie and like through people like you or Molly or whatever, these topics are coming up. Not only, of course, black women in war, but also like all the logistics behind keeping a fighting force operational. That's I particularly like that aspect.
Right. And in
Um,
terms of a fighting force, the operational aspect of a fighting force, think about mail as a vital connection, first of all. Now we have social media, phones, the internet now. So that helps us to maintain a vital connection. So that's the first issue, vital connection. And then I like to refer to that vital connection as a force multiplier, those intangible elements about warfare that makes the difference between a victory or a defeat. And so that's something that I don't think, and to put it in context of war, so these were just mail clerks. Well, they were force enablers. They were force multipliers. Although in the rear of the battlefield, the communication zone, the COMZ, just think of any element of war requires logistics. And without the basics, one being communication, that momentum, the chances of a victory severely undermined.
Just for
yeah, interesting,
just for
awesome.
our
Go
audience,
ahead.
what is a force multiplier? Because I can imagine that not all of our listeners are up to date on their military
Okay, force
background.
multiplier.
Yeah, yeah.
Just think of a smile when you're having a bad day and you need something to make your day better. Uh, Pietro, you're drinking coffee. I saw that. So that is something that's making you feel better to make you get through the day. And without that uplift in your morale, you may not have a good day. And so your willingness to work is undermined, is compromised. So force multiplier, those things that may not be readily apparent in terms of tangible assets, but those intangible elements that are needed just for people, period, to function. And morale is one of those things. And you have to maintain your own morale so you can be of service to others to maintain their morale. So the 688's morale issue was twofold. She had to maintain the morale of her own troops and then maintain the morale of the troops on the front line. And morale is something you cannot touch it, you cannot taste it, you cannot buy it. It's not something you can order. So it's those intangible items that increase your ability to produce
Yeah,
or to
it's
be productive. Mhm.
yeah,
So,
I have
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, so just so I understand it correctly. So what the 688 did is like they handled the mail, and of course, like this was important to the soldiers at the front because it was a connection to home. Like it enabled them
Yes.
to fight better,
Right.
like to really get into it. Whereas
What are you
also it
fighting
worked,
for?
yeah,
Right.
but
Right?
it also worked the other way around because it allowed people at home to stay up to date about what happens to their loved ones and their friends. And it can
Right.
motivate them to work harder in a war factory or
Mm.
to go above and
Exactly.
beyond during a bond drive.
Right. So yeah,
Yeah.
force multiplier, force enabler, just something to motivate people to perform at their optimum level. So look at it that way.
Mm.
Performance enhancer.
Yeah.
Performance enhancer.
Intangible.
And that's also what I liked about the movie is that it shows another side of the war. Like,
Mhm.
okay, so we have seen Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, those kind of things. But this one was about two different aspects of the war that were not shown before, which I
Right.
really like to see. So the 6888, as well as the importance of mail during the Second World War.
Right.
But
And that
Yeah,
was their motto: no mail, low morale. I mean, it's just short, simple. Without mail, you're feeling bad. The morale is down. Without coffee, you're feeling bad. Your morale is down. So just think of it that
yeah,
way.
but it's funny that you mention it because that's also so one of the books I'm currently working on is on the 777th Field Artillery Battalion, and several times like these Black American soldiers are writing about Red Cross women who hand out donuts and
That's
coffee.
right. Donut
Yeah,
dollies.
yeah, and they feel
Mhm.
appreciated because of it.
That's right.
And it's another example, but it's just something that
Exactly. A
connects.
force
Yeah,
multiplier, a donut. The feeling is not the
hmm,
donut, but it's the feeling that you
yeah,
get to give you hope, to give you a reason to carry on. Just like someone saying, "Hey, how are you doing today?" He's like, "Oh, I feel better." So, the subtleties, but little things matter. And male and morale is not a little thing, but as you mentioned, it's something that people don't think about. It's like, how can male mean that much? But I think the movie really demonstrated the importance of mail. I mean, we see it now. If we don't get that email, if we don't get that text message, it's this exact same concept, that communication. So it's that vital communication. If you take it out of context of mail, just think about a vital communication, and mail was the method to deliver that communication.
awesome. Anything else, Samuel?
no, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So let's go for the next question.
Okay.
What kind, and this is a good one, what kind of obstacles did the women face from the military establishment or from male soldiers in the army at that time?
And I'll focus on their time, the 6888's time in Birmingham, because these women, many of them came from the Women's Army Corps. And within the U.S., it was still segregation. So it was the obvious, it was gender segregation, racial segregation. So there were liberties that these women did not have in the U.S. So in Europe, within the military, those rules still applied. However, the Articles of War indicated that we could not, the armed forces was not supposed to use those terms or refer to racial issues because it could be used as propaganda. So that was some buffer, although it wasn't necessarily adhered to at all times. So the first issue was just lack of support from the military. The 6888 had to be self sustaining because of gender and race. That meant they had to repair their own vehicles, they had to cook their own food. Just think of setting up a small city for 800 people, and then to along with that city, you setting up the work sites as well. So that was the biggest challenge. Again, logistics, making sure the women were cared for, the basic needs: food, clothing, shelter, safe place to work. And since this was wartime, they had to work in blackout conditions, the windows blacking out. And what's not recorded that I've seen in any history books, but one of the veterans told me that the work sites had trenches around them. And they were told, hey, if something happens, there's a raid or we come under attack, you jump in these trenches. But these trenches were multi purpose trenches. They were also used for latrine facilities. And so this one veteran said there was no way that she was going to jump in those trenches if something happened. So again, the biggest challenge was I defer to logistics, establishing a work site as well as a facility for the women to live and take care of the basic needs: food, clothing, shelter, making sure the vehicles were running, And so all women were not mail clerks. Some of the women worked, we call it the motor pool, they worked preparing the vehicles. Some women worked preparing the food. Some women worked in the mail room. And that's something that Charity Adams did. She looked at the roster of women and identified those skills and aligned them with what was needed to set up a small community in Birmingham, England.
I don't know much. Well, now I'm learning more about Charity Adams, but after I watched the movie, I was like, again, what a strong character, what a great person, a brilliant leader. And then I started reading more and the interview with Molly as well. I learned a lot about her. I was like, what a brilliant person, what a great asset for the army. And they during the wartime, and they were wasting it because of sorry, but stupid reasons, right? It's incredible. Okay. Let me ask you a question. It's off script. Did like this is a personal curiosity. Might maybe it's a dumb question, although I believe there's no dumb
No
questions.
dumb
But
questions.
yeah, did like because we seen movies and series and everything. I'm not American again, so this is might be something. Might be the reason why I'm asking this. Of course, there was a lot of racism. You guys had like segregation. Um, how was like the how did racism um how can I ask this? How did they externalized their racist thoughts towards these women, black women? Was it like through sabotage or, well, I mean, sabotage, I mean, like, we need something for our unit and we're not going to give it to you. So making things harder, hard and hard in order to make him fail, or it was more like a verbal thing and of like personal offenses, and how was that in a daily basis? Like,
So, if I understand your question, you're asking what type of racism did the women experience when they
yeah,
were in Birmingham, England? Well, I'll focus on the time overseas in Birmingham, England. Within the military, the Red Cross was attempting what the Red Cross did, like with the donuts. They had to have black women. There were actually black Red Cross workers in Europe, and people don't talk about that either. Black donut dollies, because of racism, you had to, and segregation. So they wanted black Red Cross workers to service the black troops. So that's interesting. So with the 6888, some of the racial challenges, for example, the Red Cross wanted to have separate facilities for the women, and Charity Adams refused that. Wanted to, recreational facilities. Red Cross offered them separate lodging facilities. Charity Adams refused that. And within the ranks, I mean, it was segregated by gender anyway. Um, so the military, there's not a lot, there's just some assumptions made. There's not a lot of information about harsh examples of racism overseas because that was a tool for propaganda. The one that is most talked about is when this white general threatened to replace Charity with a white lieutenant because he thought that she was incompetent because all the women were not available for inspection. So it was those types of select incidents that's written about. We can make assumptions. I've read some other literature that talks about how with the black troops there were external like fights with the white troops when they would go off the military installation overseas. And there's this fantastic book. I don't know if it's available abroad. It's by the Afro American newspaper, and it's a 7 embedded journalists or correspondents who wrote stories about their time overseas. And these were all Black. No one knew that there were Black war correspondents overseas. The Afro American newspaper sent 7 Black war correspondents overseas to write about Black troops. Most of the time, when you read the historical documents about World War II, any stories about the Black soldiers have come from the Black press. So the Black press was so crucial during that time. Ollie Stewart is probably the best known. You read about that, but they talk about encounters off the installation, because within the cities, when the troops, to include the 6 would go into Birmingham, England, or other areas, the discrimination wasn't as prominent because they were welcomed by the locals. The locals didn't care. It says, hey, you're here to help us. And there were select incidents between the units. Um, but a lot of women, they just talk about more of what the racism within the U.S. as opposed to the racism abroad, because the time overseas was actually one of empowerment for these women. They were free to shop, free to go any place they wanted to. I spoke with Gary Stewart in Birmingham, England. He's a soldier in our UK ambassadors. And there were a couple of spots in Birmingham where, in Birmingham, England, is Birmingham, Alabama, Birmingham, England, where there were slight incidents of some racial tension with the women of the 6 within the city. But it wasn't necessarily from the military, just some of the locals. And the biggest issue was, I think, is talked about in the movie, where the rumors have been spread about the women growing tails at midnight, because that's what African Americans did. And interesting enough, when I was in Korea in the early 80s, that those rumors still prevailed about Black people growing tails, because when I arrived in South Korea in the military, I was told, hey, be mindful if you're out at a certain time. But it was martial law. Nobody was out after, I think it was 10 o'clock during the week, midnight on weekends. I can't remember what the hours were. So there's an expectation. If someone looks at you funny, they're thinking, they're not looking at your rear end, they're seeing if a tail comes out. So that was still true in the 80s. So it didn't go away during World War II. So it's a long answer to your short question. Some of the racism, the military tried to contain it, um, but in within the ranks, because it was segregated. So that was the obvious, overstating the obvious. The troops, the male Black troops, limited to a lot of logistical, like the Red Ball Express. On D-Day, you only had one operational unit. Excuse me, one unit that was a 332nd Balloon Barrage Battalion. I think it was a Balloon Barrage Battalion on the first wave of D-Day, and the other units were logistical units. They were all operational, but relegated to menial tasks in logistics. So that was just kind of like of embedded racism by the type of assignments that the units have. That the units had they were non-combat assignments, but by the nature of combat, it's not linear. So regardless of where you are, you're subject to combat.
It's I said that before. I'm gonna say it again
Right.
because I think it's just interesting
Mhm.
that how different. Because again, in the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, it wasn't a segregated force. So on our last interview with Cesar, we're gonna be posting next Friday this interview. He talks about like how we had black black people, white people, Japanese,
Yeah.
indigenous people, and everybody fighting together. And I'm starting to get really interested in this part of the American history, like the segregation and how it
Yeah.
worked, because it's starting to fascinate me. Well, how insane, how crazy this was in the U.S. It's
Right.
so
And
different from here.
it's interesting because there's a book out, and I have a brain cramp right now, because when the French fought, there were troops from Senegal. And you had black troops who were from Senegal in POW camps, but they were listed as French. And so no one cared if you were black. You were French, you were an American, you were a prisoner of war. And I think Hogan's Heroes showed that. There was a show in the U.S. called Hogan's Heroes where you had a black soldier who was a POW. So to everyone abroad, you were an American, period. You were French, and you were grouped with, whatever nationality. And even now you travel, when I travel abroad, it's interesting. It's, oh, you American. Nobody cares. It's like, oh, you are an American. But yeah, it was more within the ranks. And then the stereotypes evolved because of the rumors spread from American soldiers about black troops and black women. But what's interesting with women in World War II, women had to have high school diplomas, and so the men did not. And so just because of that factor, you think post-depression in America, the literacy levels were horrible. Less than 40% of Americans had high school diplomas. So the 6888 represented the best and the brightest within the U.S. 85% of those women had either college degrees or were ex-school teachers. And a lot of men, about 20 million men in America, were not eligible for the draft because of literacy levels. So that's not something that's discussed. And if members of the 6888 worked had domestic jobs within the U.S., it wasn't because they weren't educated. It's because it was lack of opportunity. And that was highlighted in the movie about some of the women who were very refined and very poised. So it was just great to see that because it defies a lot of stereotypes about black women who served during World War II. The nurses were registered nurses, certified. There's about 500 or so throughout the black women who served during World War II. Many served overseas as well. So these were the best and brightest in the nation because we were just coming out of depression and education was a luxury. So if you just go online and look up U.S. educational levels, World War II, you'll see what the literacy levels were. So first of all, women had to be better to join. They all had to have high school diplomas. The men did not. So just on that alone, and then you get Charity Adams, as you mentioned. I think she was a genius. I'm just convinced. Triple major, math, Latin, and physics, and she was in graduate school when she joined the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps in 1942. So the woman was just brilliant. At 26 years old, she led a battalion, and now battalion commanders, probably 40s. You've been in the Army, I don't know, 15 years or so. She was in the Army 3.5 years and responsible for 855 soldiers.
She
And
was
just forget
truly.
about the gender. They were in uniform, full veteran status. And many of these women use a GI Bill once they return back to the U.S.
That actually,
That by
Mhm.
yeah, no. So that made me a bit curious because you also mentioned earlier they had some mechanics. Like what happened to the unit after the war? Like once the fighting in Europe was over, and
Right.
I'm also curious, like what happened to the women that served in the unit? Did they? Many of them,
Oh,
of
well.
course, return to their civilian lives, but what happened to them?
What happened? 855 women, 855 stories, and I don't think
Hmm.
your podcast, that's a separate podcast,
Yeah.
highlighting the women post-war. Many of the women just went on with their lives and they didn't talk about their service. Most veterans don't talk about their military service. I don't talk about my service unless I'm talking to another veteran. And there was a stigma associated with being a woman, not necessarily a black woman, just a woman. A lot of women they didn't include their military service on their resumes, regardless of race. So some of the women, many of them, use the GI Bill, the educational benefits, to return to college. And for example, there's Millie Dunn Vesey from Raleigh, North Carolina, my home state, my sorority sister, Zeta Phi Beta, Sorority Incorporated. Millie Dunn Vesey came back to the U.S. and she attended North Carolina Central University, went to St. Augustine University, North Carolina Central University, got a master's degree, and became the first female president of the Wake County NAACP. And she hosted Dr. Martin Luther King when he came through on the civil rights, because what happened with these civil rights leaders, they would stay with other families because of segregation. It was too difficult to find hotels. So I think Dr. King stayed with her sister, her family told me. But anyway, now she made such an impact in that area. There's a post office that was just, the legislation was signed for a post office in her honor, Millie Dunn Vesey. Of course, you have Charity Adams, the commander. Again, she came back, finished her degree, became a college dean, board member, and became really, really active in the community. You had other women. There was one, Indiana Hunt Martin, who also has a post office named after her in Buffalo, New York. She got a job with the city of Buffalo, New York, in the helping people find jobs. Department of Labor, the unemployment office, just made such an impact in the community. And before the war, she was working in a facility that housed the Manhattan Project in Niagara Falls. And so we have three pieces of legislation honoring the 6 we have one Congressional Gold Medal that was signed in 2022, and we hope to have a ceremony this year. And then we have two post offices. We have Major Fannie McClendon, who's still alive, 104. All of the women during World War II got off active duty and then were invited to come back. She went to the recruiting station with the intention of joining the Women's Army Corps. The Air Force recruiter got her. She ended up joining the Air Force and retired as a major in 1971. So I don't have a detail of all the women who returned to active duty, but Major McClendon is an example, and there's actually a panel in her honor at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. That's within the U.S. So again, I mean, I can go on and on and on about these women, the ones that I've talked to, spoken with their families about their post-war service. But a lot of them didn't talk about the service. I don't think they were necessarily ashamed, but it was just something a lot of veterans don't talk about their service unless they're around other veterans. So for especially Black women, you don't find a lot of Black women World War II veterans. So there's the conversations, even now as a veteran, I'm around a lot of veterans, fortunately, but unless I'm around other veterans, I don't talk about my service either. Because it's just too hard to explain.
Yeah, I think that us like
Hmm.
civilians
Hmm.
would we would not understand like what's going on. Like it's
Right.
worthless. Like feels
Hmm.
it's like worthless. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got that.
Hmm.
Um,
So
yeah,
you
you go ahead, Samuel.
so you touched on something, the Congressional Gold Medal. I saw an update
Hmm.
quite recently. Do you want to tell
Yes.
us about it?
Yes, I'm excited about the Congressional Gold Medal. The Congressional Gold Medal is the United States of America highest civilian award. And since 1776, when General George Washington, not President George Washington, received the Congressional Gold Medal as the in 1776, less than 200 have been awarded to individuals or institutions. Jonas Salk, um, General Colin Powell received a Congressional Gold Medal. You have the Tuskegee Airmen, Montfort Marines, the Buccaneers from Puerto Rico. Um, and it's not a military award. You have anyone who Congress believes, this bipartisan, both chambers of Congress, that Congress believes deserves this honor, gets a Congressional Gold Medal. And that's part of my book, is that advocacy, how I was able to work with veterans organizations and volunteers and convince our Congress, and it has to be two-thirds majority of senators, two-thirds majority of the House. Both sides, our Democrats, Republicans, Independents, have to agree that a Congressional Gold Medal, this legislation, needs to be signed to honor these women. And we were able to get that done. And I just think it's fabulous. I like to think the 6888 brought the nation together 3 times, because the two post offices, Congressional Gold Medal, bipartisan. And so with the US political system, there's a lot of activity now. But at the end of the day, there's something that we can agree on. And that something for my advocacy was that the 6888 made an impact in our nation and in our Allied victory for World War II. And for that, the nation, it was unanimous consent, 422-0, when they went to vote, that the 6888 deserved a Congressional Gold Medal. Our medal has been minted. If you go to 6888 US Mint, you will see the draft designs. And it's also on my Instagram page. Some of the draft is the draft design. The final design will not be revealed for the Congressional Gold Medal, the obverse and reverse, the front and back. So I see you squinting, you're looking on my Instagram page.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah, you see it? Yeah. So yeah, it's there. It's beautiful. And I'm actually working with the Speaker of the House's planning office trying to get a date. My lead sponsor is Senator Jerry Moran from Kansas. He credits the 6888 for keeping his parents together. His father was a World War II veteran. His mom worked in a J.C. Penney store. Now, yeah, that's the front of the medal. It's very similar to that formation. We designed that back in 2023. And there's another image on my Instagram page that shows the backside. It's women working in a male yeah.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah, scroll. Oh, there's
right.
scroll back
Oh,
up. I just saw it.
There.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, if you enlarge that, you see the front and back. Yeah, so
Let me
that's
see.
the draft image. So hopefully we'll have a ceremony this spring. So my Senate sponsor, Senator Jerry Moran from Kansas. Kansas is the home of the 10th Cavalry Buffalo Soldiers who camped at Fort Leavenworth since 2018, and even before. Senator Moran has supported the 6888 Senate resolutions about the 6888 even before the Congressional Gold Medal. On the House side is Representative Gwendolyn Moore from Wisconsin. That's one of our living veterans. Anna Mae Robertson's from Milwaukee. And Representative Moore went to Marquette University with a daughter of the 6888 veteran. So we just brought the nation together on several times, and I just hopefully this story continues to do that, because the 6888 didn't receive the Congressional Gold Medal because they were women. They didn't receive the Congressional Gold Medal because they were Black women. They received the Congressional Gold Medal, unanimous consent in our Congress, because they solved a problem that no one else could in the European theater of operations. Hands down, period, non-negotiable, not debatable. So that's why I love the story of the 6888.
Awesome. Um, what else? Let me see. Okay, so the battalion's efforts weren't widely recognized during the war. How has their legacy been remembered in more recent years?
Wow. Well, 2018, we started out with the 6888 Monument, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. It's in Buffalo Soldier Park, so it's a beautiful monument. After that, Senator Moran helped the unit get its only award for performance, the Meritorious Unit Commendation. They never received any type of commendation for their efforts in World War II other than the standard badges that military people receive. Meritorious Unit Commendation. Then we have an award-winning documentary that's now on Tubi and Amazon Prime, the 6888 documentary. And while all that was going on, I was contacted by actor, Tony nominee Blair Underwood's team for a 6888 musical that's currently in production in the works. While we were doing that, just numerous street renamings, state proclamations, and Fort Lee was dedicated to Fort Gregg Adams. Adams, named after Charity Adams. Of course, we know about the Netflix movie in Maryland. Now we have a 6888 day, March 9th. There's a fantastic display at the Army Women's Museum at Fort Gregg Adams, where families donated their 6888 items from their relatives who serve, aunts, grandmothers, mothers. So there's a beautiful display in the museum. And so the story continues to grow. And of course, Congressional Gold Medal are waiting for that ceremony. And that the bronze replica will be available to the public for purchase. It'll be a 3-inch bronze replica and a 1 1/2 inch. So it's just a good keepsake, great memento. And then I mentioned the 2 post offices that we have renamed. So it's just a lot. And people are now writing books about the 6888, historical fiction. So I probably am not capturing everything about the 6888 in terms of how the story has impacted, and I would say internationally, because here we are, I'm talking to the two of you who are not within the US, and the interest is still, it's not waning. It's people are very interested in this story because it was one of those aspects of World War II that no one ever knew about.
Yeah, my friends were sending me the movie. They were like, "Oh, did you
Mhm.
watch it? Did you watch it? I just watched the movie. I thought about you." Like, yeah, I know, man. It's good. All right. Do you want to
No,
carry
because
on, Samuel?
yeah, because it's interesting that you mention overseas because there's also, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a legacy trip. You're organizing a tour for
Yes, thank you
people
for
following.
reminding me.
Yeah. Okay.
It's
Yeah.
the
Please.
second trip.
It's
It'll be
yeah.
my third trip
Mm,
for the 6888. What's interesting, you're talking about social media back in 2019 when we first started. Didn't have a lot of followers on, it was then Twitter, and I posted about the documentary. And the U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom invited us over for a documentary tour. And we went throughout the UK, went to Scotland and several cities in England to help the UK celebrate the 75th anniversary of World War II. Then in 2023, we organized a tour to the UK to retrace the steps. We start in Scotland, we go to Birmingham, Rouen, which is huge. There's also a street named after Charity Adams in Rouen, France, because the 6888 worked in Rouen, which was a concentration camp there. And so they work in that area in Rouen. So we went to Rouen. There's a street naming. We had a street naming ceremony in 2023 in Petit Quevely. And we went to Normandy, where there are over 9,000 graves in Normandy, 4 women, and 3 of these women are from the 6888. So that's an interesting tour. And we're going to do it again in this year, 2025. So, just in terms of recognitions, it's an international story because World War II was Allied forces. So, that's important to remember. And just reading, delving a lot deeper into the mail operations, it was an Allied network of mail operations. So, we focus on the post office network from the 6888. And in my book, I when I visited Birmingham, England, and talked to the locals, and it was the perspective that they have and the information they shared about the 6888 was just absolutely phenomenal. And also putting in context because they talk about how the locals had only seen images of Black women on television. And they saw these intelligent, brilliant, smart, sharp, well dressed black women. It's like, whoa, this is nothing like we've seen on television or in the newspapers. And here's a spoiler alert for about my book. So, just reading about the history of the 6888, I believe that General was the Inspector General who approached Charity Adams, where she said, "Over my dead body," because I learned the Inspector General would go around inspecting the mail operations because there's a big problem with people stealing items because you think war-torn country and in that area that was, I mean, the locals were working the postal operations for a while, but you're talking about poor, devastated in a community. And so that was a problem with mail being stolen, items shipped from the U.S. People, a lot of people were stealing mail. And then the mail that couldn't be put back together again, the mail that was being salvaged, just okay, had to be destroyed, and some could be salvaged, some could not. So the destroy pile, and then you had the mail that had to be censored. So you had all of these different departments for mail, and don't forget we had allied forces. So it was an allied post office network that the 6888 and the U.S. was part of, because when it comes to logistics, the allies have to take care of their own. So we were part of an allied force. So we have to put it in a larger context. And so it's just interesting to read about this Inspector General going around, and he went to a bag of mail that was supposed to have been destroyed, and somebody pulled out a letter with his name on it. And I think there's probably a setup the way this story was written, true story. And so he relieved a white male commander. So he was going around, this Inspector General was going around inspecting mail and had already relieved the major, his name was Major Jernigan, a white male commander. So, of course, he was entitled to inspect anything that he wanted to. And so, what's even more interesting, when I saw the movie in Arizona with the 104-year-old veteran, Major McClendon, she gave a great commentary. Her first comment, she said, "Yeah, I remember him. I didn't like him. Yep, that's how it happened." But what she also said, she said, "Yeah, they said worse things than that to us." So whatever was in the movie, Major McClendon said it was far worse. And that's coming from someone who was there. So the movie captured the essence of the story. But yeah, so just by talking to the locals and really digging deep, about the story of the 6888, I'm just kind of like history detective putting pieces together. So you just think this general and who came around, I think it may have been the inspector general, which makes sense because he had fired one white male major, and then there's this black woman who's also a major is going to tell him, over my dead body. Of course he's going to fire her. He had just fired one. But of course he had to step back because he was wrong by introducing race. If he hadn't said white male lieutenant, she probably would have been court-martialed or fired. So, but the rest of the story is in my book. And I was like a kid in I don't know if it's a candy store or new toys. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it. It all makes sense now, but it's from an international perspective for that story. So that's a spoiler alert for my book that I hope readers will enjoy.
Yeah, that's the thing I wanted to talk about right now. I wanted to talk
Mhm.
about your book
Yeah.
because we know it's coming out next May, right? The
Mhm.
8th, right?
Yeah, May 8th, Victory in Europe
May
Day.
8th. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, true. Yeah, it's the V Day. And just before you start talking about it, I want to say that to all of you who are listening or watching to this, we're gonna be posting about her book on our social media. So stay tuned because when the book is released, you're going to be able to buy it and you're going to be able to find it in our social media, right? And I'm going to also put the link for it in the
Thank
description
you.
of this episode,
Mhm.
right? So, yeah, Edna, talk about your book. Tell us what it's all about. And yeah,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. My book, it started out in 2016 as a fictionalized version of my life. And I just kind of in between, I'd stopped consulting for a while. This traffic in DC, I was just tired. This was before telework was popular. So I just took some time out and said, let me just try writing a story the way I thought I wanted my life to turn out. And I read it and I said, this is absolutely ridiculous. And I set it aside. And I became involved with the 6888 in 2018. I donated to the monument, fell in love with this project. And one of my friends, her name is retired General Mary Kay Eater. She has a great book, Girls Who Stepped Out of Line, about World War II women. And she included a chapter about Charity Adams. She says, when are you going to write your book? She says, I know it's already written. We had served together. And she's an amazing author, Mary Kay Eater. And I said, yeah. She says, you need to write your book. You're telling everyone to share their story, veterans. And that's what I do. It's a platform. You have a story, share your story. The 6888 is a great story, but you have a story too. She's like basically saying, don't be a hypocrite, share your story. And so with the 6888 advocacy, I'd done so much until I just sandwiched my life in between the 6888. I opened with the 6888 and the impact, and I closed with the 6888. And my story is growing. I was born, it was then at Fort Bragg on the military base. Saw my father before I was born. He had deployed, I mentioned World War II occupation force in Italy. He was Korean War, and then 2 tours of Vietnam, Dominican Republic, and every place else. He was with the 82nd Airborne. So to me, I was just fascinated with his life and the impact on mine. So that's the gist of the story. And then just navigating, my working title was The Odds Ain't Good. And of course, the publisher didn't like that, but I looked at my life. I'm like, wow, I beat the odds. When I started college, less than 10% of African Americans were college, part one. Part two, when I made '06, less than 5% of any Army officer made colonel. Let's forget race, gender, so 5%. And then when I advocated for the Congressional Gold Medal, it was two cycles of our government, two administration during COVID. So the bill had less than a 3% chance of passing. So I was like, okay, I've just been beating the odds. And so I'm like, oh my God, I hope my luck doesn't run out. But that's the gist of the story. What I weave in the different wars, the impact of my father being wounded. He was part of the advisory force in Vietnam. And then he was with the historic unit in the Korean War. And then I married a veteran as well. Last name happened to be Cummings. That's another story. But he was the first African American to have the command in Korea on the DMZ, the Joint Security Force called JSF at Camp Kitty Hawk. And his counterpart had been killed by North Koreans in 1976. So when I sat down and stepped back, I'm like, this is pretty interesting stuff from a historical and wartime context. So I start with World War II, and I just kind of storytell from World War II and to include the global war on terrorism with 9/11 because I was working at the Pentagon at the time. So that's in a nutshell the story, my story, and then the 6888 in terms of the impact. And the one photo I remember seeing that photo with Charity Adams behind a desk, and I'm like, that is familiar. And I started going through my files from when I was stationed in Korea, and I believe you have that picture. I'm like, wow, we're sitting
Yeah.
almost the exact same way. And when I saw that, I'm like, this is it. It's all kind of came together because I tell people when I do presentations, it's no longer my history. This is now my heritage. This is now my heritage because a heritage is a lot more personal. Her service made, and the 6888 made my service possible because once the 6888 served overseas, other branches of the military opened their ranks to Black women. And so you're talking about pioneer patriots, trailblazing, along with solving a complex problem when no one else could. Again, setting aside race and gender, just don't even have that conversation. If we talk about going to a war torn country, sorting through 17 to 20 million pieces of mail in 90 days and restoring reliable mail operations when no one else could, nobody cares about race or gender. They care about who got the job done. And then you add in the other constraints and impediments to that service. It's a compelling story. And I just could see so many parallels with my military service and some of the things that were challenging for me. She also, had the same challenges because when I joined the Army, believe it or not, I joined the Women's Army Corps. I'm saying that kind of low. So for a short time, the Women's Army Corps wasn't disbanded until 1978. So that's why when I got commissioned in 1978 in May, my military orders commissioned me as a member of the Women's Army Corps detailed to the Army. So I don't like to say that because people are like, oh my God, you were in World War II. I'm like, no, But that's why it's so personal. It's not just my history, it's my heritage.
Yeah, it's brilliant, amazing. I'm gonna
Mhm.
I'm gonna send you some emails because I'm going to Korea in July,
Okay.
and I wanna you've been there, so I wanna learn uh cool places, historical places to visit if you know,
Oh
or
yeah,
maybe
the
places
best
you.
places are now in the subways because my daughter was a ESL teacher in Busan, and I visited her. My mom visited me when I was 26, stationed in Korea for Thanksgiving. So when my daughter was teaching in Korea, because she was 26 at the time, I visited her. So I'm like, you have a daughter, you have to celebrate Thanksgiving in Korea. That's another story. But yeah, all the really cool places are now the traditional Korean markets. Everything is in the subways or in specialized areas. But by all means, if you go go to Busan, that's on the
I
beach.
will.
It's
I
beautiful.
will.
It's all beautiful. I love my time over there.
And by the way, I'm an ESL teacher as well.
Oh,
That's
are
my that's
you?
wh- yeah, that's why I speak English, and I hope I speak English good enough.
Oh yeah,
That's
it's
that's my
perfect, and that's
profession.
that's why I went to Buenos Aires. My daughter, she was in Buenos Aires on an ex-Spanish program before she started teaching all over the world, and then COVID hit, so she had to adjust.
Cool.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, Samuel, do you want to say something? Do you want to ask anything else?
No, I wanted to mention we'll of course include the link to the book in the podcast
Oh yeah.
description as well as
Yes,
put it
yeah,
on the
that's a
message
cover.
online. I really look forward to reading it. 8 May
Yeah,
it
well,
will come
I
out.
hope you
Yeah.
enjoyed. And I encourage other veterans. I applaud you for writing several books. So I have a couple of more that I intend to write. And I just hope it's an educational tool because I'm just so grateful to the University of Virginia Press because I got a lot of rejections. It says my story was bland. Nobody got it. I didn't have personality because I'm, military people. I guess I'm dry. It wasn't exciting enough. But UVA took a chance on me, and I like it because they fact checked everything. It's an academic press. And if you go to UVA's website, I hope you share that as well. The University of Virginia's website, they also have instructor guides, I believe, on the website, UVA, just put UVA Edna Cummings, you see a soldier's life.
Yeah.
I'm just so impressed with the academic. And what I like is fact check, and it helped me really because you cannot always rely on your memory because as a memoir, you're writing from memory, but I just went back to make sure that my memory is correct. Like I write about meeting Robert F. Kennedy when he was at Fort Bragg at the time, and I wanted to make sure what event was I attending. So those are the type. Even though it's my memoir, the backdrop. Yeah. So let's go to authors. Click on authors. Yeah, go at the head. Click on. Let's see. Just do
Or
search. Yeah, just do search in UVA search bar, upper right,
search
upper right. Yeah, and then just put my name in there, Edna Cummings.
Edna Cummings.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah, there you
there it
go.
is. And so yeah, and I've had some great reviews. I'm excited. Actor Blair Underwood has given me reviews. CBS News anchor Nora O'Donnell, Charity Adams' son, Dr. Francis Draper, publisher of the Afro newspaper, whose grandfather started the Afro and then the father sent 7 journalists overseas to make sure the stories of the black troops were covered. So it had not been for the black press, we wouldn't have these stories. So if you click on a soldier's life, click on the image. Yeah, there you go. Just click on it. Yeah, the upper.
Let me share. Let me reshare it because it opened in
Yeah,
another tab here.
yeah.
Let me
And so you can
redo it.
see the reviews also on Amazon. The
Yeah,
American Psychiatric,
yeah.
Dr.
There you go.
Rawls. Yeah. So if you see that, you see exam copy, desk copy. If you look at some of the editorial reviews, I think if you scroll down, yeah, if you
Yeah,
yeah, just click
reviews.
on reviews, yeah, you can scroll through those. General Eater, the one who prompted me to write the book, she wrote my foreword. Mary Kay Eater, Girls Who Stepped Out of Line, must read if you want to know about women who served during World War II. I mean, I learned so much from her, even about some black women whose
Here,
stories are part of the larger narrative as civilians. Charity Adams' son, and just scroll down to some of the reviews. I'm just so grateful for those. And of course, Blair Underwood. There's a great book if you want to read something fascinating. The Alexis Clark,
Oh,
she wrote a review. There's a story called
no.
Enemies, a book called Enemies in Love about a black nurse who served in the US. She married a German POW because the black nurses were tasked to work to treat the German soldiers and black soldiers. And that was just an unlikely pair. The military says, all right, we need someone to take care of the German soldiers. We don't want the other nurses. So they assigned them to the black nurses. And the story pretty much talks about how when this German POW saw this gorgeous, stunning, attractive nurse, he says, I'm going to marry you. And he did. So that's a
That's an
fascinating.
interesting
Yeah,
some
I
sort
mean,
of
it's
Romeo and Juliet story. Like
yeah, and it was challenging, and yeah, you see Dr. Roll Andrews and Charity Adams' son. So I'm just so grateful for everyone who has written
here's
a
his
review.
Stanley Early,
Yeah,
the
that's
son of
Charity's son, and
Charity.
then Dr. Tony Draper, from the Afro newspaper, who helped capture. And the Afro newspaper actually had a daughter. One of his daughters served in the 688, and she wrote articles about the 688 while she was in France, Vashti Murphy Matthews.
yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
these are just some nuggets of history. You ask me what happened to the women, more about the women. It's hard in a documentary. Our documentaries on Tubi and Amazon talks about some of that. But in a 2 hour movie, there's impossible to tell 855 incredible stories. So I think it's great that the movie starts the conversation, expands the conversation. Many of us have been having it already, and people are really interested and just curious about this part of our American history that no one really knew about, no one talked about. So,
I'm gonna also add the link of this University of Virginia
hmm
uh,
yeah, and
press.
hopefully I'll be able to come to the UK at least because UVA has a press element in London. So I
Yeah.
hopefully I can make it over and do a book signing or talk in London. So if anybody wants me to come over, just contact the UVA, and I'll be glad to. There's a huge chain of bookstores over there, and I'll be glad to do a book signing and have a conversation because the perspectives that I've gained from traveling to the UK is part of not only research but just exploring and just having a firsthand experience in these places, actual places where the 6888 served and lived was just amazing.
Awesome. All right. So we are kind of walking towards the end of it.
Yeah.
So, Samuel, do you want to say anything? Do you want to ask something else?
Of course, like if there's anything you wish to add, anything you wish to tell us more about, now
Yeah.
is the moment,
Well,
of
I
course.
guess, the biggest thing, first of all, thank you. And
You're
keep
very
in
welcome.
mind, with Charity Adams as a commander, she had to make sure the mail got through to improve the morale of the troops on the front line. But she also had to maintain her own unit morale, and that's just a basic element of leadership. I have to motivate my troops, my soldiers, so we can continue to perform. And she was brilliant with that. The women had sports teams and won sports tournaments throughout Europe, and sometimes they had barriers to even getting there. We talk about that in our documentary on Tubi and Amazon. And also, they form entertainment groups. So they entertain troops throughout the UK. So that's just something to keep in mind, and that the 6888 were only about they were a portion, about 10 to 13% of all the women who served in the U.S. at the time. And there's some other books about those women's service. Glory in Their Spirit talks about Black women being court-martialed at Fort Devens, and because they refused to perform menial tasks and tasks that they at lower levels than what they were trained for. So the women in the U.S., a lot of them had a hard time. They were beaten, imprisoned, spat on for standing up for their civil rights. And the 6888 did not experience that, but their mission, although it was male, it was an opportunity to be treated with dignity and respect. And I believe that they accomplished that. And I'm just so grateful to our Congress coming together and appreciating and respecting the service of these soldiers who made such an impact during World War II.
Awesome. I'm honored to have you here. To
But
yeah,
thank you
it's
for having me. Hmm.
you're the kind of person that we need more people like you out there working.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh,
Um,
there are a lot of different platforms. People are just really energized now. So I think this is the beginning of a lot of storytelling about these unknown heroes of our history that we just has been buried. So I think this is a great opportunity, and thank you for giving voice to these
yeah, we
stories.
we will we will continue. You said that you're planning to write more books. So again, once you
Mhm.
do it, or maybe before, we're going to invite you again to join
Okay.
us and talk about it for sure. So as we go to the end of the episode again, if you listened till this point, thank you very much. We appreciate a lot your support. We hope you learned as much as we did.
Mhm.
Don't forget to follow, depending on the platform where you are listening to it. You follow or you
Mhm.
subscribe. Give us a like. And in this episode, I would like to remember our audience that commenting is very important. You can comment whatever you want. For the last episode, we had a couple of nice comments, and I feel that we could use more of your opinions in the show and tell us what you like, what you don't like. We're very open to listen to it. Um, Again, Edna, thank you very much for dedicating your
Thank you.
time to us today. It was a brilliant interview. It was very, very good. Um, Clean, nice. I'm very excited. I was a little ill this morning, and now I'm feeling 100%. I
Yeah,
feel
force
like
multiplier.
Yeah.
all the history classes here revigorated me. It brought me back on my feet. Um, So yeah, thank you very much again. One more time, your work is brilliant. Your career is impressive. Um, and that's it. Samuel, do you want to say anything before I finish it up?
I'm very glad that you took the time to talk with us today. Truly, I
Yeah.
very am. Yeah.
And Samuel, thank you for your support. I know we've emailed and chatted, and you just helping us out a lot. I truly appreciate an international perspective because we have, perspective from families and friends and supporters. But I'm just so glad that this story has reached across the water. It's transatlantic.
Yeah.
So
It
thank you so,
is.
so very much.
It is. It's amazing how also like his work got to me here, like in Brazil, and now I'm starting to spark the curiosity out of people here to think about. Because in my mind, I like to think that I'm doing my best, everything I can for those stories never die. For
That's right.
those people, for they remain immortals. Because what they did was it's impossible to put in words. Like I struggle, like with to put in perspective, like to people to realize what it really was to be there out there in a world war, the biggest conflict
Right.
in human history, right? So yeah, Edna, do you want to say anything else?
Oh no, just thank you,
No?
and just let's keep in touch, please.
Oh yeah, will for sure. So thank you very much, you all. This is the end of episode 12. Um, we're gonna have a new episode coming out on Friday. So this episode will be uploaded on Sunday. Uh, Tomorrow, by the way. But next Friday, we're going to have a new episode about the Brazilian Expeditionary Force as well. Don't forget that this episode, along with the Molly Sampson's episode, those are special episodes we did specially for the moment of the release of the movie, and it was an opportunity to bring this World War II stories that are starting to get into the mainstream um, media and everything. So go watch Molly Simpson's episode. It's a compliment to this one, and this one is a compliment to that one. Watch the movie. Do your research about the 6888. Leave in the comments what you think about it. And that's what I was going to say. Every last Friday of the month, we have a new episode, so stay tuned. That's where I was going with all of this. Okay, so
All
see
right.
you people. Thank you very much. Have a good one, and I'll see you on episode 13. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Hello there. Thank you very much for watching until the end. If you liked the video, please leave it a like. If you didn't like, unlike it and tell us in the comments how we can improve. Don't forget to subscribe because that supports us a lot. And stay tuned for more here in the World War II Daily podcast. Thank you very much. I'll see you on the next one.